I've got straight up 12 o'clock. Welcome again, everybody, and appreciate you taking time on your Friday noontime, and beautiful day in Blacksburg, and happy you could join us. With that, we got several things to cover here this noon, and hope you'll find this webinar educational. I would ask perhaps maybe if you want to type questions into the chat box. I think our best strategy is to move through our 3 or 4 topics and get those presented, and then we'll take questions as we get towards the end of the webinar. So thanks again for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Currin. Dr. Currin, the screen is yours, as they say.
All right, thank you, Dr. Greiner. I'm going to get my thing started up here. Okay, are we showing the screen correctly, Dr. Greiner?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, so thank y'all very much. I'm glad y'all could join in. I realize that we have a combination of people that are both joining by computer and by phone. I'll do my best. I do have a few slides that have some graphs and charts and things on them. I'll do my best to kind of go through those so it makes some sense to the people watching. I also believe, Scott, this will be recorded. I don't see the little button saying it's being recorded, but I assume you're recording this and it'll be posted for people to view later, correct?
I am doing so right now. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So what I really want to talk about today was what I think are some of the marketing and management questions we ought to be asking ourselves in this unique situation that we're finding ourselves in. I don't pretend to have the answers to what the market price is going to be tomorrow, next week, next month, next fall, but I do have the questions that I think that we need to be asking ourselves, and I'm going to try to provide you some data to help make those decisions. We're going to look through fall calving herds, spring calving herds, and then farms that have both, or farms that either are, I should say farms, sorry, considering it, or maybe should consider it. You know, in abnormal times, we have to consider doing things abnormally. So we are certainly, I think everybody would agree, in abnormal times. And so we've got to at least explore different options and different ways of doing things and different management decisions. But I'd like to remind you that we're in tough economic times. All the best management practices that kind of been recommended and that you are doing, they almost always are economically sound decisions, no matter what the economic times are. Producers got to be agile and well-informed. We've got to be willing to be ready to move and change our plan and adapt our plan based on what's currently going on. You know, the market price for cull cows over the last month or 6 weeks this has been going on, we've seen about a 2-fold difference in price of those cull cows. We've seen cull cows up approaching 70 cents and down around 40 cents, depending on where you're at in the state of Virginia, in the Mid-Atlantic, what the demand was. Now, there's certainly demand for hamburger and all that stuff, but if there are not 2 slaughter plants open and 2 competitive people bidding on those cattle, then we don't have that. You know, our feeder calves have fluctuated quite significantly. If we have grass type cattle, we're certainly coming right to the end of probably of grass fever, and we've seen 5 weights, and then when 5 weights are high, it moves up and 6 weights get pushed up. Those cattle have brought pretty darn well versus those feeder calves that were a little bigger and going to the feedlot, and certainly they have suffered a fair bit more. So that's something that probably pretty much everybody tuning in knows. but just to realize how rapidly that's changed and everything. What do you need to think about for all farms? Well, anytime things get tough, prices go down for our products, we want to look to limit input cost. That's the first thing everybody always thinks about. You know, and I'd encourage you to think strongly about infrastructure and equipment purchases that you might have been considering making. You know, those are things that improve quality of life, but probably don't add to our bottom line. And I've never heard anybody say they were sorry they improved their cattle working facilities, for instance. But it is an expense, you know, and other than letting us do things that we might not normally do because our facilities weren't good, it's not going to add anything to our bottom line right away. You know, on the other hand, we do not want to limit input costs that increase the number of live calves and increase calf weight gain. You know, so when we're talking about products like 7-way clostridial vaccine, it's very cheap to start with, has little impact on our overall expenses on a calf basis per year, but could have a big impact if that calf dies. Deworming of calves, implanting of calves if you're not participating in a natural program. All those kind of inputs, we're going, unless we just can't pay our bills, those are the kind of inputs that we're going to want to try to keep there, because at the end of the day, we've got to have live calves and pounds of calf to sell to make some of that money. Some of our other speakers are going to talk about this, but just to kind of set the table a little bit, we want to make sure you're in position to maximize forage usage. You know, do you have the correct stocking density? Are you overstocked? Are you understocked? You know, there are opportunities we're going to talk about in a minute to look at if both of those cases are a thing, but look closely to see what your stocking density is. You know, it costs nothing extra to make good quality and decent quantity amounts of hay. You know, just effort on our parts. And I know that's a challenge. Looking through 30 years worth of forage results from Virginia hay production on beef cattle farms, it is a challenge for us, but you know, we want to use that because that'll allow us to use less supplements to do those cows, purchase less feed, hay from other people and that sort of thing. If they graze more, you know, that's great too. Depending on the economic factors, byproduct feeds may or may not be available that we're used to using, and the price may fluctuate considerably. You know, so it may be cheaper or it may be more, depending on how much usage they're getting, what their availability is, whether those plants shut down. But it's just another variability, and I think one of our speakers is going to address that some as well. So current marketing challenges, as I said, these huge swings in cull prices, both up and down. From week to week, it's hard to know. And just because you talk to so-and-so, they took their cattle to the market last week and they got a good price, or they did not get a good price, doesn't mean that's going to be the case today. You really need to stay informed, talking to your local extension agents. For those of you that are the extension agents here, you know, one of the biggest things you can do to help your producers is to stay informed yourself so you can try to give the best advice you can. Is it going to be wrong sometimes? You bet. But we're going to try to do the best we can and give them some advice to make decisions. Less variation in feeder calf prices, mostly down, except for those grass cattle. And I think we're coming towards the end of that now. As we get towards the 1st of May, we're going to see those cattle get softer as well. It's my prediction there for what that's worth. It's been less variation. It's mostly been down, particularly for the big cattle, but overall a little bit less unpredictability than the cull cow market. So as some of us are thinking about taking cull cows to the market, like I'm going to hammer this again, stay informed. You know, Brown's packing plant, for instance, shut down, got backed up and got a backlog of cattle, and then we lost a lot of value out of those cull cows. You know, and at the very beginning of this thing, as people made a demand and run on stores, there was a huge demand and the price went up. I'm not going to tell you which way it's going to be this week or next week. I don't think anybody can tell you, but I am going to tell you, I would have my pickup truck ready to go and trailer. And if I got good information that cull cows should be high this week, then I would be ready to move those cattle. And that's the advice I'm giving to my clients, is to be ready to go. I'm telling people, get those cull cows rounded up together and be ready to move when the market's good, because a twofold difference in the value of those cull cows can result in a lot of money in the bottom line of our farming operation. All right, switching gears and looking specifically now at fall calving herds. And I'm going to look specifically at what our near-time decision-making options are. It's about time to wean these calves, getting closer at least. Some of you will start weaning earlier than others, and I think that's something to think about. If you've got plenty of spring grass and that sort of thing, I'd encourage you to consider leaving those cows and calves together for a little longer. Pretty cheap gain there and that sort of thing. So I'd consider looking at that option and maybe waiting up till June, as long as spring's looking good and we've got good grass grow. You know, if we don't have to purchase that extra feed, then that's good. We also have, though, the selecting and marketing of cull cows, selecting replacement heifers and that sort of thing. And that's a decision that's coming up, you know, and can be made as soon as the day we wean those calves. Should I keep some of my cull cows instead of heifers? That's a question we need to ask. Should I keep more heifers if the prices are down? Maybe, depending on what the situation is, you should be doing both. And then, you know, what about retained ownership? That's something with the fall calves we don't have to worry about until later on down the road, but something to think about. So I put a range of prices in here just to give you some background, and for those people on the phone, I took 700-pound backgrounded heifers and ran a price, did a sensitivity analysis and ran the price all the way from 90 cents a pound up to $1.20. You know, and then I took 1,200-pound cull cows and ran them from 35 cents a pound all the way up to 70 cents a pound, and then got the total dollars that we could sell those animals for. If you look then, this is my sensitivity analysis of that information, and it looks at, and we take kind of what I'm going to call a typical market deal, where we're getting, say, 50 cents a pound for our cull cows and $1.20 for our heifers, these backgrounded 7-weight heifers. Then the opportunity cost, the decision to keep that cull heifer and sell that cow, is $240. So it's costing us $240 more to keep that heifer at those particular prices than it is what we're getting for the cow that we are selling that she's going to be replacing. Okay, so the way to think about that is that at any time, if you use that as your baseline, you can look and see that in this bottom left-hand corner, when cull cows get cheap and heifers are high, when that number is more than negative 240, so it's in the red in parentheses there, and it's more than $240, then that's when it's really costing you a lot to keep that heifer. It's costing more than your typical, or what my typical example is here. And you can look, and I've done that for all the huge variation in potential cull cow prices and heifer prices, because like I said, I think it's difficult to predict that, but hopefully this will illustrate to you guys why we've got to really think closely and make educated decisions on cows we either keep or heifers that we keep. And if you look here, given the prices that we've seen for both of these commodities within the last 6 weeks, that decision could be wildly different, depending on whether cull cows are selling for 40 cents or 60 cents. It changes the dynamic hugely. So you know, there are some cows that just need to go. Okay, the picture there on the right, you know, we've got a cow that's got a bad udder and that sort of thing. And some of these cows just need to go. And, you know, keeping those cows is not going to be beneficial. We're not likely to see a good calf out of that cow next year to sell. And so just remember that I'm talking about those cows that are on the borderline. There's some young open cows. So we preg check cows, and you know, I just did this, and I'll jump ahead to this guy's got spring and fall herd. I just preg checked some young cows. We had 2 open first calf animals, and we're gonna roll them right into the spring herd and bring them and breed them with the spring cows based on today's market conditions. He thinks he has enough grass and forage to handle those 2 extra animals, and we've decided that that's better alternative. You know, here's a herd. We had 87 cows. This is a spring calving herd that kept all of their young cows. So those cows less than 5 years of age. Majority of them are 2 and 3 year olds that were open at the end of spring preg check. We then turned those 87 animals that were open into fall calving cows, and you can see that we wound up with 2/3 of those animals pregnant in the first breeding cycle, where they were with the bulls become fall calving cows. And at the end of a 70-day breeding season, we had 95% of those animals pregnant. So that tells me a couple of things with this particular herd. One, there was nothing wrong with these cows reproductively, probably. We probably were not feeding them quite appropriately through their first winter and as cows. And so they got a little thin on us. And so we then needed to do something that would provide those animals a little more nutritional support. So that's a management thing to do with cows in the future in the spring, but it shows you that these cows can breed back relatively successfully. Now, for those of you that are doing unweaned calves straight off the cow, you're going to be selling them here relatively quickly. I'm going to say that was a 500-pound calf, and you sell her straight off the cow, a 500-pound heifer calf. You know, now we're looking at if that 500-pound calf sold for as much as $1.20 unweaned and straight off the cow, then the Cull Cow price stayed at 50 cents, then you're replacing that cow for essentially nothing, right? The value of that heifer versus the cost of that cull cow are the same. So, you know, what you're looking at there then is if you're selling unweaned calves straight off the cow, when cull cows get cheaper, then all those things in red would be in the short term an economic advantage to you to keep the better of those cull cows. When cull cow prices get high, then you're selling unweaned heifer calves, then in the vast majority of the situations, you should sell those cull cows and those borderline cows and keep these cheap heifers back. Now, just want to take, you know, many of us learned a lot of hard lessons in 2014 and 2015. You know, I'll quote my dad from 2014 when we got done selling calves that fall. My dad said there was only one problem, and is that we didn't have enough calves to sell. He wished he'd had more. Come to 2015, and I taught my son and ran my son out of the cattle business because I bought him some really cheap Holsteins that I thought I'd got purchased at a good price relative to the market in the spring of 2015. And he took care of those things all summer and got the pleasure of working for no money. Matter of fact, if I hadn't helped him out a little bit, I think he would have come out a little bit in the hole. So we kept every cow that was pregnant. It didn't matter if she was on 3 legs or death's door or whatever. In 2014, we kept them around because, after all, a 300-pound calf in 2015 was going to bring us $1,000 that fall, and so we were sure that's what we needed to do. Just to realize that I'm talking about cows that are on the borderline, young open cows and that sort of thing. I'm not talking about these cows that just need to go. The cows that need to go need to go. And so we need to be sure we remember that. You know, I worked with some clients in years past that their strategy has been to keep lots of cheap heifers in times when times were tough, and then sell them all when times are good. Hold on one second. Hello. All right, Griner says I'm about out of time. So spring calving cows, consider keeping young cows that have lost calves if cull prices are low. You know, that young 2-year-old animal that lost a calf, it wasn't her fault. Consider keeping her versus you know, to keep her again and rebreed her. And then I'll stop now. At some point, you got to make the best decision you can and go with it. The markets are changing, and it may or may not be in hindsight the right decision. But if you're not making a decision, that's actually making a decision. You got to keep that in mind. And then we have another session to cover more things in 2 weeks, and we'll cover some things with stocker calves and weaning and backgrounding fall calves, Virginia market updates, and some feed alternative updates from various speakers next time. And I'll stop there and turn it over to Dr. Griner.
Thank you, Dr. Currin. Dr. Mercadante is going to get fired up here, and while he's changing, we're switching slides. If you've got questions, if you want to, probably the most efficient way is if you just type those in the chat box. I'll collect those, or as we're going here. Happy to have Dr. Vitor Mercadante give us a little update on the breeding season. Vitor?
Hey, Scott, can you hear me well?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you guys can see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I apologize if the connection is not great, but we're driving here down the 81, just around the the SARS McCormick farm. So if the connection breaks up, you know, I apologize, but just got done breeding some cows at the James River, the State Farm in James River, Virginia, Department of Corrections. So we're driving back to Blacksburg now. It's really pleased to see almost 100 people on this webinar, so really happy to see that. And like Dr. Currin said, you know, it's definitely some abnormal times, but I think it's even more important now to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get cows pregnant, because that's how we're going to make money, right? So if you haven't started your breeding season yet, we're probably getting close to it. So just want to highlight a couple things that I want you guys to be thinking about it if you're planning your breeding season, okay? So, you know, set your dates. For sure, you want to know when you're going to start, when you're going to finish, right? Ideally, we're keeping our breeding season not too long. I like to see around 70 days, but hopefully less than 90 days, everybody has their dates set for this. So, you know, make sure you have your goals and you have your calendar ready. So are your cows ready for a breeding season? You need to make sure that they're good body condition score. We know that cows that have at least a 5 body condition score will get pregnant, have more chances of getting pregnant than cows that are not less than 5 body condition score. We also know that cows that have a shorter days postpartum period before the beginning of the breeding season are less likely to become pregnant. So we like to see our cows with at least 45 days postpartum by the beginning of that breeding season, because those cows are more likely to get pregnant. Okay. Think about your heifers. Dr. Currin talked a lot about keeping some cool cows, or replacing, getting more replacement heifers. One thing that we need to make sure that they're ready to breed. So a couple of things we can do, make sure that they're in the right body weight. There's a lot of discussions if it's 55% or 65% of the mature body weight. you know, I think we're on the safe side. We're 65% of their mature body weight. But more importantly, you want to make sure they're cycling by the beginning of the breeding season. So something that your veterinarian can help you with is performing a reproductive tract score on those heifers. This is a 1 to 5 score, where heifers with a 1 is reproductive tract score have an underdeveloped reproductive tract, are not cycling, and heifers of 4 and 5 repro tract scores, heifers are cycling and are ready to go and to get pregnant during that breeding season. Also, pelvic measurements are important to make sure that we're not having any trouble with dystocia later on once those heifers are going to be breeding. But those are things to be looking for when you're selecting your heifers. Is your bull ready? Right? Make sure that you schedule your breeding sounds exam for those bulls. Hopefully you had already done that and as we get close to the breeding season, but we like to see that at least 60 days before the breeding season because then we have enough time to go buy another bull or give the bull some time to recover so we can test him again. But make sure you're testing your bulls so that we're certain that they can get cows pregnant. You might be considered using artificial insemination. So if you're doing that, make sure you pick your sires. Call your AI rep, discuss which bulls might be better for you. Using some calving knees bulls for heifers, for first calf heifers might be important. And make sure you have sires that are aligned with your genetic goals on your operation. Also important at this times, I haven't heard anything about people having trouble getting supplies or getting semen shipped to their farm. But I just want to make sure that we're doing this as early as possible to avoid any surprises, right? Because things have been getting delayed sometimes in the mail, and so we just want to make sure that we're not on that situation. If you think about AI, hopefully you think about synchronizing your cows. So other thing that we can talk to you, if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. We can talk to your veterinarian or talk to AI rep, and we can help you pick the best synchronization protocol for your operation. There's several options there, and there's definitely one that might work better for you. Also, it's important. Dr. Currin talked about it might not be the best time right now to invest on updating facilities and buying a brand new hydraulic shoe. But it's important if you're going to be synchronizing cattle, we're going to be working them more often through the shoe. So it's important to walk around your facilities and make sure that we can fix them. Have a nail sticking out, or if you have that board that's half broken, that gate that doesn't shut well, just walk around and make sure those facilities are in the best shape so that we can work our animals better. And we know that, when we have cows flowing through the facilities, more less stress environment, all this, it's going to impact our production. So we want to make sure that we're doing this the best way possible, okay? What about your heifers? So breed your heifers first. Make sure that we're breeding them 7 to 10 days earlier than your cows. We know now for sure the heifers that get pregnant earlier, calf earlier for the first time, they will wean heavier calves for their life, productive life. They're also going to stay longer in the herd, have improved longevity of those animals. So making sure your heifers are getting pregnant early so that they can calve early is really important. Also, that's going to impact them as first calf heifers, because if they calve earlier, they're going to have a little bit more time to recover for the next breeding season. And we know that our first calf heifers are animals that really need our help to make sure they get pregnant again, okay? I want to point out a couple places where you can find some really good resources for breeding season, picking sires, picking synchronization protocols. The Beef Reproduction Task Force website, which is listed here in this this slide, www.beefrepro.unl.edu for those in the phone. You can just Google Beef Reproduction Task Force. There's a lot of really good resources there that can help you plan for the breeding season. One thing that I want to highlight that's available there is the Estrus Synchronization Planner. This is a Excel spreadsheet. It's free. You can download it, and it makes a calendar for you based on the protocol that you pick. So if you can go in there and you can say, I want to breed cows on May 10th, and I want to use this protocol, it will create a calendar, and it's going to give you all the injections, everything you need to do on the different days. So it's really good to help get organized and make sure we're not giving the wrong injection at the wrong time, and we're keeping things on time with those protocols, because we know that's crucial for success. I'm gonna briefly leave here my contact information, my email, my office phone. Haven't been spending a lot of time in my office, but make sure you send me an email and we can get in touch with you and help with whatever you need. So thank you very much. Hopefully the quality wasn't too bad, but Scott, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Vitor. Dr. Wilson is up. We'll let him get slide switch. Vitor, while we got you quick, a question came up. Is there an AI course planned for the fall? Maybe you can cover that quick while Bain's getting his slides up.
Sure. You know, we had one planned for May, but for obvious reasons, we had to cancel that. I'm planning, as long as things, you know, stay and get better, and we're allowed to have, you know, extension events again. We're planning another one for the fall. So stay tuned, and hopefully when this virus, you know, quiets down a little bit and we can get things under control, we'll have another AI school here in the fall. So stay tuned. Okay.
Thank you, Vitor. Dr. Wilson, to follow up with that, floor is yours.
All right, can everybody see my screen and hear me well?
We're good.
All right, so I'm going to give a little bit of a nutrition update, and some of this might be just the follow up with what Dr. Mercadante was discussing, and I know it looks like maybe in 2 weeks we're going to talk a little bit more about some nutrition topics as it comes to maybe alternative feeds, as our feed availability changes quite a bit, and it's kind of up and down because of COVID there. So today I want to give just maybe a little bit of reminders as we kind of head into the breeding season. And I think it kind of goes without saying that last year was extremely dry and pretty rough on forage production, whether that being standing forage, pasture, or hay. And so we've already probably had to bear a lot of the brunt of that as we're kind of on the backside of winter, and we're getting closer to turnout and what hopefully should be a lot better year here. But we might have some situations where we've got some carryover effects. So we've got some cows that are in low body condition score, kind of in the winter and coming out the backside of that. So I guess I would encourage you all to, you know, maybe assess what they look like today from a BCS. You clearly fed them through the winter, you know what they look like, but maybe think about it from assigning a body condition standpoint. And that's really important because we need those cows to be in a moderate body condition score, really kind of that 5 to 6 range, as we be thinking about the spring calving cows heading into the breeding season. We obviously know that poor BCS cannot affect just not only conception rates, but milk production. So that's going to be our income later in this year when it comes to weaning weights. And then we're heading to breeding season. You know, there's been tons of work on fetal programming, and we know that if those cows are kind of shortchanged nutritionally at this point, you get her bred, and that can also affect kind of the development of that next calf as we get through this summer. So it's really important to kind of get those cows to where they are. Luckily, as pasture availability increases, our pastures grow quite a bit. We are at a time of year when we do kind of have the great equalizer of high quality available forage, as long as our rains kind of hold out there. I've got on here next, you know, if those cows are thin now, heading into that breeding season, the most important thing is really to then get them on a positive plane of nutrition. If you've got cows that are in that 4 range, you know, it's not likely that in the next couple of weeks you're going to be able to magically get them to a 6, and at least do that in an economical level. You at least get those cows to start gaining body condition score. We know that does help their plane of nutrition, and then their fertility going forward here. So our spring calving cows, they are they are kind of at the position of their peak energy requirements. And I've kind of got this on this next slide here. Just to kind of keep in mind here, this is kind of where these cows are at through their production cycle. And we're kind of right here about this kind of era I've got kind of here for approximate turnout and pasture date. So we're just, if you haven't weaned calves already, you're probably definitely making preparations for that. So we're kind of at the point that those cows do need to be taken care of. But we've kind of got that forage availability should be helping us out quite a bit in that. But like I said, if your cows are thin, we need to make sure we keep them at make sure that we get them at that positive plan of nutrition right here heading into that. Not maybe as much related to the breeding season, but we do have kind of our fall calving cows. And luckily you're kind of at the point that we are weaning those calves, and we've kind of at the point of lowest nutrient requirements. So really those cows, maybe we've kind of got them through the tough part of the winter and should have them bred already. So we're at the point that we can probably focus a little bit less on those cows here in the next couple of months as we get to green grass. Next slide here is just a body condition score. I'm not going to show the whole range here, but as you kind of look at your cows and assess where they're at, basically this 5 to 6 range is where they need to be. We know that there's a big line of big threshold here between a BCS 4 and 5 when it comes to fertility there. We've got those cows that are 4 or less, and they're gaining weight and headed back right. We should be okay in terms of fertility, but if we're much less than that, then those cows are probably going to need some kind of nutritional intervention to kind of maintain fertility there. And as you think about what it means for a body condition score relative to the weight gain, this slide here just kind of shows the relative differences we've got different weight cows and different body condition scores, and kind of what that means in terms of added weight. And for example here, to take a 1,400 pound cow that maybe is currently a BCS 4, these weights are all based on cows being at BCS 5, but she's a 4 now. To get her to a 5, we're talking about adding 99 pounds of body weight. And that's quite a bit. And that's kind of where we come in and say, if we can get these cows in a positive plan of nutrition, that's going to help things out quite a bit. Because really to drastically move them in a short amount of time is going to not be economically feasible for us. So some other kind of challenges or considerations for cow-calf nutrition, or in general, cattle nutrition. This is the time of the year we need to be feeding high magnesium minerals to kind of stave off grass tetany. And I would say, to kind of echo some of the things Dr. Currin talked about, is I think we don't want to completely just throw out a lot of our best management practices, given that we might be in some trying times economically. And I would say don't get cheap with your mineral program just because of COVID. Yeah, those cattle can still get grass tetany whether we're in a pandemic or not, I guess would be my point there. When cattle are on rapidly growing pastures, at times it can be tough for them to consume enough dry matter. There's a lot of forage out there, but it's very lush, rapidly growing, and the dry matter of that is pretty low. So if you're in a situation that those cows need to be consuming a lot of dry matter to add a lot of weight gain, there's times that it does benefit us a little bit to maybe provide a little bit of added supplement there just to make sure that those cattle are consuming enough dry matter. And also kind of be cognizant of maybe the added needs of those fresh calf heifers and those 3-year-olds to kind of keep them and where they need to be, as they also have added nutrient requirements to basically support their own growth and development, as well as that next calf, whether it be lactation or other nutrient requirement needs. And then some other challenges, and I think these are going to be on deck for discussing a little bit greater detail in 2 weeks, is be cognizant of kind of the availability of feed and how that's changed a little bit. And I guess one reason I put this in here now is you might be in a position you need to make a decision for our next seminar rolls around. DDGs, the availability of those is decreased greatly, and those that are available are at a much greater price than they were, say, 2 weeks ago or a month ago. And there's possible future disruptions maybe in other commodities, whether it be corn gluten feed, soy hulls, soybean meal even. It remains to be seen what the effect on prices of all these things will be, but you think about social distancing measures and maybe where production of those products is at, we could have some supply chain disruptions. So order feed early. I guess that gives you time to either source that feed or think of alternative sources, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. If any of you have livestock that you've lost market access, be aware that there's maximums for fat thickness and kind of what those are given your different species there, and maybe consider limit feeding to maintain quality and decrease your daily feed cost. You can only get them but so fat and push them but so far before you start to incur a lot of kind of unacceptable carcass quality there. So with that, I'll kind of finish up and turn that over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Bain. As Dr. Fike pulls his slides up, I just take a moment. It's been asked. We are recording this session, and we will get it. We'll get that posted, and we will distribute that to everyone. And so be on the lookout for that. Dr. Fike, I saw you there, but I don't see your slides.
How's that?
There we go. You're on.
All right, thank you very much. So I just want to not so much reiterate some of the issues that the previous speakers have talked about. I think I want to just jump in here and think about forage programs in a more general standpoint. A lot of us perhaps think of ourselves as cattle people, livestock producers, but we need to remember that the basic commodity is forage. And so we need to be thinking about how to manage the whole farm, not just worried about only the livestock itself. And as we go through this today, I'm going to think a little bit about soil fertility and maximizing the length of the grazing season. Also want to think in terms of some forage methodology. And I'm going to close my screen. I guess I can. All right. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is, what are the 3 primary management practices that you should be utilizing? And I want to talk about each of these in some respect today. One, you should be soil testing and applying appropriate fertility. You should be using rotational stocking or rotational grazing. And you should be stockpiling tall fescue. And that's in part a way to mitigate toxicosis. I'm not going to spend any time really talking about toxicosis today, but stockpiling tall fescue in winter situations is an excellent way to do that. But these 3 things are critical for the success of your system in terms of economics and productivity. So I want to use this quote from Steve Lucas. He says, "The performance of my animals reflects the conditions of my pastures, and the condition of my pastures reflects the state of my soils." Soil is foundational. Although I, as a forage person, would say that forage is the base commodity, that productivity of your forage is dependent on soil and soil fertility, soil health. So just a couple of thoughts on fertility. We would generally recommend that soil would be in the medium to medium plus range for our pasture systems. We don't see a whole lot of response when we get up into the high level, but if your pastures are run down in terms of their soil fertility, you're not going to get the productivity that you would desire. And you're probably going to see a lot of invasive species or pasture grasses that are not the most productive or the most nutritious for your livestock. And so, maintaining soil fertility is critical. And I want to, so that was the previous one showed you the response of forage yield to potassium. This one is again showing the same sort of pattern with increasing forage up to medium plus sort of range or even high range with phosphorus. Now, somebody say, well, okay, that's good, but let's look at this in a grazing system. This is a study that came out of Missouri, and they looked at phosphorus fertilization as opposed to supplementation with a magnesium mineral block. And Dr. Wilson said we need to think about magnesium supplements. And I'm not knocking what he's saying, but in some cases we can get better magnesium uptake if we have added phosphorus in the system. And we also need to consider the role of pH, so maintaining or adding lime to maintain soil pH so that these nutrients are available to the plants, so the plants grow better, and they support a better mixture of species in the pasture. So don't skirt the fertility. Also, we oftentimes when we're thinking about fertility, we're talking, many of us will be thinking about nitrogen. And I want to speak a little bit about the role of fertility in supporting legumes, or remind you that P and K and adequate pH are critical for supporting legumes. These are some data out of Alabama that we're looking at fescue with clover versus fescue with nitrogen. And you can see those animals that had access to clover had higher average daily gains. The clovers break down more rapidly, and so they support more intake, which is the key driver for animal performance. So, and you notice here in this study, they actually had higher gains per acre. Here's another study. Actually, this is a study from Arkansas where the gains per acre actually were not as good. The value of the gain was lower, but the cost of the gain was much lower. I had a secretary once told me, said, it's not all about your income, it's also about your expenditures. So in this case, doing things that support clovers in your pastures was beneficial for the overall system economic performance. And so that's something I think we need to consider. It takes money to make money, my dad used to tell me. And so, making sure that we're keeping up with fertility to keep those pastures productive, to keep those cows productive is important. Now, the other, one of the other things I said we need to do is consider rotational stocking. If we are not managing those forages appropriately, we're going to not have a system as productive as we should. This picture is a picture that was kind of a demonstration in Kentucky where they were looking at cutting the plants. These are orchard grass plants, and they were cutting on a weekly basis to about 1 inch of height. And you can see what the difference was compared with the plots where they were cutting at about 3.5 inches, and they were cutting on a roughly a monthly basis. And so you can see how much more regrowth you get out of that. So, this is, I'm going to pass this one just for time. How we manage those defoliation events depends on the species that we're grazing. You can see if we're grazing low in the orchard grass, you can see where that color gets a little bit lighter. We're getting down into the stored carbohydrates. But if we had something like meadow fescue or bluegrass, we can graze to a closer cutting height or defoliation height, and it doesn't have as negative an impact. I was working at a grazing school once, and some of us were, we were interested in how much standing mass is there, and at what point do we move the cows based on what their predicted intake would be, and how much available forage was there when we turned them in. And the producer said, "Oh, you guys make it too difficult." He said, "You just look at that stand, and if it's starting to turn a little yellow, you're starting to get down into that stored carbohydrate zone of that plant. And once you get to that, it's about time to move." So this is a cartoon that kind of shows you some of the same idea based on plant development. As the plant is beginning to, or if the plant's been defoliated, it's going to use stored carbohydrates to grow new leaf tissue. And those new leaves will support the photosynthesis that supports growth. And so you'll sometimes hear grass grows grass as a catchphrase. If we overgraze, we don't have a whole lot of residual leaf, and that plant has to use a lot of carbohydrate resources to develop new leaves, and it slows the growth rate down. So when we think about managing that, however, when do we want to graze? Do we want to graze when that plant has 1 or 2 leaves on it, 3 leaves? Kind of what's our strategy for coming back to that? So you can see as these plants get to a sort of a state of restoration, you're going to start to see this leaf 1, the oldest leaf, is going to start to die. So with fescue, we're typically thinking somewhere around the 3-leaf stage is about the time where we would like to come back and graze again. And this is just another study that reaffirms this idea that if I start out, here's 0 days, and I defoliate, and then I let that plant grow back. If I'm under some sort of continuous stocking arrangement where the cows don't have a whole lot of pasture and they're continuously or often frequently defoliating the stand, you see after that plant's maybe at the 1-leaf stage, I don't get a lot of root growth. I don't have a lot of weight, that is the stubble milligrams per plant. I don't have a whole lot of weight in the whole plant, and I don't have a whole lot of weight in the tiller. But as I allow that plant to grow, the weight responses are here on the right side. They follow the same sort of pattern. And the water-soluble carbohydrates, that's energy storage, will accumulate in those plants as I allow them to go more days without defoliation, or to develop more leaves, as it were. So if you look at the one on the right, if I'm defoliating on a regular basis, I just have very small tillers. They don't weigh very much. As I allow that plant to get to a more mature stage of development, say 3 or 4 leaves, then I'm getting bigger plants, I'm having better root systems, that sort of thing. So the pattern that we often see in Virginia is we have people that will overgraze, and those plants have very little carbohydrate reserve. They have very little leaf area to support growth. And one of the things that, again, it's critical to remember that intake is the key driver to animal performance. And so, people say, well, this shorter stuff, it's more nutritious. That's right. But so if you look over here at the dry matter intake, you can see T1 represents, say, a 14-day regrowth. T2 represents 21 days of regrowth, and T3 represents 28 days of regrowth. So the dry matter intake on a kilograms per hectare, just consider that it's roughly pounds per acre. And if you look at dry matter, actually what I'd rather look at is the dry matter intake here, intakes per bite. As that animal has a bigger sward, they can get more intake in each individual bite. And yes, they don't utilize quite as much, but when we look at overall gain for those animals, when they've had an opportunity to graze on a sward that's more robust, they can pack more in each bite, and they can do a better job in terms of gain. Now, I said I would talk about stockpile, and one of the things I want to talk about is Graze 300. Actually, I think I have my slides in reverse order. I'm gonna hit this one first. This is a resource that, if you're not aware of it, I would encourage you to look at the Graze 300 website. In times of low cow prices, high feed prices, it's incumbent on us to do the best we can to graze as many days as possible. And one of the ways to do that is to use something like a summer stockpile situation. I don't have to make that hay or make as much hay for my system. And if I can graze more days, using summer stockpile is an effective strategy for doing that. So I just want to point that out as something to look at. those pastures that we use for summer stockpile also will, have an opportunity to rest. And so this is a management technique. I don't want to spend time going through the details of it. I just want to point it out to you and ask that you go back again and look at this website for more information about Graze 300. The whole concept of Graze 300 came in working with an ag economist, Greg Halleck at Kentucky. Greg said that when he did the analysis across high hay and low cattle prices and low hay and high cattle prices and the other combinations across those scenarios, if we're getting about 300 days of grazing, that's about the economic sweet spot. So if you're feeding a lot of hay, several days of hay, you need to consider how to do a better job with grazing management. And maybe it's not so much the grazing management, maybe it's being overstocked. And some of the Graze 300 information you'll find indicates that there are producers that are actually more profitable when they have reduced cow numbers. So remember that clover slide I showed earlier, where I said, in some cases they didn't have quite as much income on an acre basis, but they had far fewer costs on an acre basis. And that's sometimes, so again, I would look at that. And the other part of managing the grazing is thinking about the impacts on the plant underneath the ground. This is some data that's quite old, but you'll look at this kind of idea, the kind of a take half, leave half is what we've often talked about in terms of a management strategy. And you'll notice that this percent leaf volume, when they removed about half the volume, they had minimal root growth stoppage. But as they continued to take more of the leaf area, a higher percentage of leaf area, that resulted in root growth stoppage. And some of you may have known Dr. Dale Wolf. Dr. Wolf sent these pictures to me a long time ago. When those roots are in the system and there's forage above ground, when you get a sudden rainstorm, it has the opportunity to capture that water and to put that down into the soil profile to support growth. But if we have plants that look like this, we get a lot of runoff, and maybe you need a pond, maybe you want to overgraze the watershed to create that pond, but that's probably not what you want. That's really not desirable. So managing grazing for better profitability and for better environmental outcomes and greater productivity is critical. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it. Scott.
Thank you, Dr. Fike. Folks, if you've got a quick question or two, we're pushing up on our time here. We had one in the chat box, Dr. Fike, and that was on a limited budget, where do we get the biggest value in maintaining a high quality pasture and hay? Is that through weed control, pasture rotation, or a fertilization plan?
So I would say it's somewhere between rotation and fertility. Both rotation and fertility are going to be drivers in weed management. So if you are defoliating weeds at the appropriate time, so some weeds are not all that palatable when they get big, but if you can hit them early, you can set them back. If you are allowing the plants to regrow enough to shade out the weeds or to prevent weed seed germination and development, that's another way of reducing your weed problems. Having adequate fertility to support the growth of the forages you want is critical to all of that. I was talking to somebody recently who they were working with a producer who had lots of broom sedge, and she had made some advances in her pasture management through rotation, but she still had lots of broom sedge, and she limes regularly, but she didn't put any phosphorus down. So, if you want to deal with these issues, you need to kind of think about them comprehensively, and you can make some gains with, one type of input or another, but our best way forward would be to maintain the fertility and use rotational stocking. Maybe some other types of grazing methods in a strategic manner, but typically rotational stocking is going to be the best for us in conjunction with a good fertility program. So I'm not going to say you got to do A or B. I think you need to think about A and B. It's kind of a both and situation.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, folks? If you got them, or if you want to unmute your phone and ask them, that'd be fine as well. Got a couple questions about parasite control and ticks, and might be a good topic. We'll put that one in the bank and address that at a future webinar, unless Dr. Currin has a brief comment on that.
We've done a number of those throughout the state of Virginia. We're probably up to, between myself and my colleagues, up to about 15 or 20 of those meetings. Many of those have been recorded depending on where you're located, but it's something that we're talking about doing statewide as well. So we probably will, in the very near future, put one of those together and go over that for producers and veterinarians and extension agents all to be involved in.
Thank you. Well, folks, it's just a little after 1. We very much appreciate y'all joining. A couple quick reminders. We've got another one of these scheduled for 2 weeks from today at noon. We'll get the details of that out to you. The web address, the link will be the same. We'll mix up those topics. We'll get the topics and speakers sent out and distributed. And we're also recording today's session, so we'll get that posted as well and get that out too, so you can share that. Or rewatch some of those if you'd like. By all means, if you've got questions or would like to follow up, drop us an email, give us a ring. We're here to help. Appreciate your attendance today, and hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you.